Chapter 25. Encounter with Bureau 13. A man may be haunted with doubts, and only grow thereby in faith. Doubts are the messengers of the living one to the honest. They are the first knock at our door of things that are not yet, but have to be understood. Doubt must precede every deeper assurance, for uncertainties are what we first see when we look into a region hitherto unknown, unexplored, unannexed. George MacDonald, An Anthology, 365 reading. The fire woke Himari and Sonechka out of a cold sleep. Mellor was nowhere to be found, and neither was the cube, but they noticed these things later. What they perceived first was smoke, then screeching fire alarms. They gathered all their warmest clothes about them and stumbled into the night, pulling on garments as they fled the flame. They'd barely gotten gloves, hats, coats, socks, and boots arrayed, and were standing out from the fire. Sonechka called Mellor's name several times. Then she heard footsteps. She turned around, and from the darkness, black hoods were suddenly and roughly drawn over their heads. They were dragged along, and muffled screams... They were dragged along with muffled screams to the back of a vehicle that was thankfully warm. Neither Sonechka nor Himari spoke Korean, though both knew a word or two. Himari could only remember a few things in Russian. Sonechka could hardly communicate in Japanese, so the girl huddled up against her, but when she cried out in Japanese, Sonechka only caught the pain in the words. Himari said, "I can't find the cube. I had it, but I don't have it, and but I command it's gone. And white boy is gone," and she wailed. This prompted brusque North Koreans maneuvering the SUV parade to speak harshly and beat the women, neither of whom understood. The anger that came from the North Koreans was aimed more at Mellor and the loss of the cube. Even so, both women would have likely been used and liquidated if Choi had not understood their very real value as leverage in negotiation. However, he did not know where Mellor went with the cube, so he stayed at the burning hotel several streets away, presiding over the stolen females in the custom-made soundproof, bulletproof, tinted SUV. Setting fire to the motel only made sense to the North Koreans. In this way, everyone would have to exit, and Choi could figure out who was who. Also, neither he nor his men had any love of any nation that was not ruled by their dynasty. So they set fire to the building without a second thought. The plan worked, and in the confusion, catching the surprised women was easy. But they expected there to be a man with them, and nowhere about the women or the burnt-out room they came from was any sort of transparent golden cube. So Choi sent his men to search along locations as potentially outlined by Miru, and he tried to interrogate the women under their black hoods, but all he got were tears and repeated phrases in language he did not know. So he had his men firmly beat them with batons until they learned to whimper rather than cry out, and waited, parked near the burning hotel as response crews arrived. In due time, Choi's expectation was rewarded. A rental car of the old Soviet variety pulled up, and out came the Russian Robin Hood. He was with some gangly Japanese bastard, for some reason. Choi picked up his radio and made the announcement, then waited until the car with Russian Robin Hood and his Japanese bastard buddy pulled back onto the street and had gone a good distance before he followed with his lights off. Himari whispered in total fear, and the darkness made her breathing strained. She tried to close her eyes and sleep away the madness, but could not. Then she remembered the computer with the virus, and everybody having the virus, and needing the error-correcting code, and what Mellor had translated from Sonechka about how a person could acquire that god antivirus. For the first time in her life, sincerely, consciously, humbly, in terrible fear, bruised in the back of a North Korean SUV in the dead of night in Yakutsk of Siberia outside a burning motel, Himari reached for God unreservedly. God heard, and what came next was this: merciful, merciful sleep, born of utter exhaustion, emotionally and physically. Choi, meanwhile, carefully followed the boxy car, radioing to his fellows if he were getting too close. They watched their quarry from multiple vehicles, getting ahead and to either side through adjacent streets. The boxy little car went to a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant festooned in Chinese characters, Russian lettering, and Orthodox Christian iconography. Choi said, "Track any data associated with that restaurant. Send to Miru and have him map out intersection points between that restaurant and our interests." The results, which came back seconds later, revealed interaction with a VPN that ultimately was accessed from some point out in the middle of the woods, 10 to 30 miles south and east of town. The image couldn't be enhanced, he had to dead reckon the distance. Said image came with exact coordinates, though, and these he plugged into a search engine. Russian Robin Hood and the lanky old man from Japan emerged from the restaurant, got in the ugly car, and headed southeast. Choi and his Bureau 13 men continued after. It had been perhaps an hour from the time Mellor dazedly slumped in the passenger seat beside Kaido. Now he was seeing faint flecks of snow drifting diagonally across their field of view through the windshield. They were on a road that would intersect an ice highway soon. Mellor said, "It should be open by now. We'll have to cross to Maya, then Sestra Maya. By your phone's map, anyway." "What if it's not open?" Kaido arched an eyebrow at him from the driver's seat. "We'll need a helicopter if it's frozen. If it's not frozen. It's too choppy for ferries this time of year. If it's not frozen, it's too weak for cars, unless we chanced it. But then if it's not plowed, it's not open. So, let's hope it's open." It was. Yakutsk gets cold quick, dipping below zero on the Fahrenheit scale by October, most years. When things were so cold, ice was generally thick and strong enough to support the establishment of seasonal bridges. So was the case here, but the wind had picked up, and now the snow was coming again, the beginning of that second storm system. Kaido was nervous and tired and tried not to show it, but did so incidentally when he clammed up and devoted his full attention to the road. This suited Mellor's rotten, sad, astonished, confused disposition. There was an aching feeling in his stomach he hadn't known since he escaped the cannibals who named him. He kept seeing Himari's face, and now he could remember seeing something behind her eyes that he recognized, something in his own eyes. She certainly realized who he was before he realized who she was. This was why she started to meet his gaze rather than look at him sideways or look quickly away if he made eye contact. The poor thing. That Yami was a drunk. Damn, he'd have to look her up now. How is he going to find the North Koreans? Could Ricky and his crew help with their strange portal cats? His leg was restless and he found himself having a shiver, like when the body is stretched in early morning. Only he wasn't stretching himself, he just shook. Mellor wasn't the type of man to shake like that. He was strong, fast, capable, controlled, and skilled. But this... A burst of anger percolated through his mind suddenly, and without meaning to, he pounded the dash and let loose some of his more indigo Russian vernacular. Kaido tapped the brakes and they fishtailed a second, finally yelling, "What? What is it?" Mellor looked at him, eyes wild, then exhaled, ran hands through his hair, and remembered his Japanese. "Nothing. Keep ice on the road. I'll watch navigation." And he clumsily reached for Kaido's phone and the coordinates on its map from the #1 Chinese cafe. It was a fool's errand. Mellor could concentrate on one thing, and one thing only, and felt himself wrenching inside, then felt himself trying to downplay it all, saying mentally, "She got this far without me and she's just fine." But then the other side of his mind said, "Mellor, she's autistic." He shook his head. "So? Like me being there when she was little would have changed that. I didn't even know about her. And Yami has always been a drunk. Probably her fault." But then that other part of his mind said maybe that would have made a difference, you being there. Maybe she would not be drunk. And he was pulling at his hair again, looking at the blowing snow of the river out the window. The road across ice was over a mile long, and it was stupid to go faster than low double digits, especially in the night as new winter began to form a new storm. This inner back and forth defined the majority of Mellor's thinking on the ride until he'd really gotten into a dialogue with himself, one so exceptional he finally found himself thinking at a God he didn't believe in, consciously, which was distinct from pleas of his subconscious spiritual self. He never intended, after all, to get on the wrong side of the mob, such that faking his death was called for, or be party to the real thing. Maybe Yami's persuasion helped him make the bad move, but well, it wasn't her fault. She probably didn't know she was pregnant at the time. And what kind of father would Mellor have been if he were there, in and out of Yakuza dealings with Russian gangsters of diverse stripes, meting out beatings every other day on behalf of loan sharks, pushing stolen merchandise? That would have been no upbringing for a young autistic girl. And of course he couldn't have taken her with him on the road to casinos in and out of countries. He was barely able to manage her in adult form through North Korea. So God, what was I supposed to do? Now Mellor didn't realize in his mental back and forth that he was in fact working toward a state of regret for his past actions, a regret that would prompt him to avoid being involved in such poor decision making in future. Repentance, in effect. An internal decision not to defend known evil and to turn from it. It was a fight, though, because he himself had a hard upbringing and good reason for the legally unattached way in which he did things. Maybe they were wrong, but, well, he'd certainly been wronged, hadn't he? Was he supposed to just die in ignorant poverty? Is that what he was supposed to do? Then Amari wouldn't have come into existence to begin with. In fact, his chess-playing mind theorized, part of the reason she even lived was because of his mafia activity, and the woman he conceived her with that way. Why didn't Yami just abort the child? After this thought, a darkness fell on him, and he had to restrain himself from beating the dashboard. He immediately regretted this thought, and resolved never to think that way again. He could save the girl. He just had to find her, and that's when, whether or not he fully understood what he was doing, Mellor Romanov passed through a veil. It was a veil of mind. A sort of circular thinking pattern was escaped. And now his mental train was cruising through new climes never before explored. This new train of thought had so taken him, he didn't realize he was speaking aloud as he said in Russian, "Christ, let me find her safe. I'll do anything after that." Kaido, not knowing much Russian, said, What is it? Did you see something?" "It's all right," Mellor replied and sighed. He didn't feel anything immediately. Perhaps if he were more astute, he would have noticed mental static, the kind compounded into endless revolving thoughts that went nowhere, cleared up considerably. In fact, at first he thought maybe things were clear outside, maybe the storm decided to blow over, but no. It was snowing harder than ever, and they were right in the middle of that river by now. Feeling the difference and not quite understanding it, his eyes searched about the vehicle, eventually being caught by a glimmer in the mirror on the passenger's side. It was just for a second, but were those headlights behind? Or Yakutsk proper? But the glow came and went, didn't it? Like someone who didn't want to be seen but had no choice owing to the increasingly involved storm. Mellor turned his head and looked through the rear window, covered in a thin grime layer from snow that melted and left particulates behind. There were the lights again, far back, disappearing fast, but definitely there. Mellor turned forward. "Maybe it's not all right. We have a tail." Kaido looked in the middle mirror, his own, then craned to see in Mellor's before turning behind briefly himself, then snapping his neck back forward. "Could just be a rock on the traffic." "Maybe." "Green Korea or North Korea?" Mellor shook his head. "Either. But I say one of those cult commies." "What do you think we should do?" "Keep driving." Mellor began checking the guns on his person to assure they were fully loaded and he had spare magazines. He also patted himself down, assuring his blades were where he left them. Then he found the cube, withdrew it, looked at it, then at Kaido. What were they going to do? He looked forward. The ice stretched on and on. Ice. Mellor looked up at the storm, then squinted at the ice road, and then nodded. It would be slick ahead. He said, "We need to find a bend in the road." "What's that thing?" Kaido motioned to the cube. "Part and parcel to all the drama." Mellor found somewhere under the vest he wore to store the cube so it was secure. He put it right over his heart. The sound of the wheels on ice changed subtly, and now they were on gravel again. It was a very subtle shift, but soon a noticeable switch in elevation indicated their transition to a land-bound road. Trees were numerous here, though weighed down in snow. Indeed, it was the slightest bit slippery. They were over the bridge, both that of ice and Mellor's own soul. Mellor was looking at the map on Kaido's phone. "Looks like 3-4 minutes. A curve will do." Is it too slick?" "No." "Do you fear snow?" "Also, no." "Then drive, will you?" And Mellor looked back again. Their tail was far, but not far enough. "Okay." And Kaido sped up. They were alone on the road. The snow was coming faster, as was the wind behind it. One big truck came trundling by, and they didn't slow, initiating the ghost of a honk disappearing behind in the night. Mellor turned to Kaido. "You got a gun?" "I always have a gun." "I'd say I'm impressed you snuck it through customs, but I know it's a local."
"Well..."
"Have you tested it?" Mellor caught his eye very briefly.
No. Твою мать!
"Okay. Let's hope it isn't some damn zip gun off 3D printer."
"If it is round and does not explode in my hand, I will make use of it."
"I'll take your word. Bend's coming. Slow as near a stop as you can. Keep straight. Once slow, pull hazard lights, shift into neutral, and run across to the far ditch. I'll take the near. Roll windows down just in case. It's unlocked."
"So we know it's unlocked, right?"
Kaido nodded. The bend appeared. Both men tensed, eyes ahead. Mellor minimized the coordinates on the phone's map and handed it to Kaido. They might not return to the vehicle. Kaido pocketed the phone and slowed to 10 kilometers on the speedometer. Mellor said, "Let's go," and bailed. Kaido slammed his door open and sprinted across the street into the cover of trees fast as he could, only partially slipping as he got off the road. Mellor scrambled a good distance up a tree-covered hillside, and 15 seconds later, a big black SUV that had some flavor of Spec Ops written all over it came slipping around the corner thrice the speed limit. The driver had to slam the brakes because the little Soviet sedan flashing hazards was only rolling at a snail's pace right ahead. Naturally, the slickness of the road allowed no such maneuver, and the driver swerved hard. Associated slickness also befuddled this attempt at mitigation. Soon the SUV was sideways in the middle of the road, eventually completing a full turn before facing forward in time to rear-end that old sedan right into a ditch. Those in the SUV were fast. A handful of seconds passed, and 3 men jumped out, dazed and yelling in confused Korean, waving automatic rifles. 2 came from Mellor's side of the road, out the middle and passenger door. He began to fire from behind, nailing both. They pitched howling into the ditch, staccato reports from their automatic rifles making impotent arcs in the night. The 3rd jumped back into the driver's side of the SUV and frantically began shouting into a CB radio before wrenching his own rifle over the top of the vehicle and spraying in the general direction of Mellor. Mellor scrambled fast, rolling to the side. Kaido was able to get a shot off from across the road, causing the man to duck back into the Suburban, leaning all the way into the driver's seat, using the flapping door as cover. Mellor was on his feet, running in billowing snow, but then heard a shot from behind and saw there was another SUV. Turning forward, he ripped open the passenger's door on the vehicle they brought down and unloaded where the man in the driver's seat should have been. It was Choi! Mellor recognized Choi. The little idiot was still wearing his sunglasses even at night. But Choi was fast, dancing out the door again, firing his rifle but unable to get it turned around in time and instead lodging rounds in the driver's side window along with Mellor's errant shots.
Neither man hit his target. Choi sprinted fast to the SUV behind, crossing in front of it, running diagonally to the side of the road Mellor came from, and out of Kaido's line of fire. Kaido failed to hit him, but managed to discourage those in the second SUV from exiting. Kaido from exiting immediately as they slid to a stop and he strafed their windshield. Mellor dove headfirst under the steering wheel from the passenger seat of the SUV he was now inside, pushed down the brake, reached up, shifted to reverse, then slammed his free hand into the gas, jerking the vehicle backward. Just before he heard the rear of the vehicle crunch into the bright lights of the SUV behind, he heard the muffled scream of a woman and his heart leapt inside. Impact! They hit hard enough it knocked the driver's seat into recline, and he rolled into the back where he saw one shape entirely motionless on turned-down seats, while another mumbled and thrashed about, both with black sacks over their heads. The grill of the other SUV hit the rear doors hard enough they warped. One of the glass windows spidered and crunched, sending out a powder of glass. The other popped out entirely and rocketed into the passenger seat, thankfully missing the three persons inside. Mellor spied a rifle, scrambled over the bound women, and began firing at the engine block of the SUV behind. He could see the glow of more lights attempting to round the bend into the distance. This third black Suburban apparently was warned, and screeching brakes caused it to come around the bend at an angle. Choi somehow managed to get inside the vehicle in the middle, and it started to reverse as smoke belched from the hood where Mellor fired, soon impacting the third. Mellor turned around and shifted back to drive, pulling around the rental car, pushing open the driver's door, firing behind, yelling for Kaido. Kaido got the hint and managed to scramble down the hill. Mellor took a right, drifting with the driver's side doors forward and passenger side door as a shield. Kaido managed to dive into the middle door on the driver's side, shots ricocheting behind. Mellor fishtailed them back forward. The vehicle had some cosmetic damage, and one of the lights was pointing off in a funky direction, but it was accelerating. "Drive it! Drive it!" Kaido yelled. "Cover the rear out the broken window." Mellor handed the rifle back. Kaido assented and carefully crawled over the bodies of the women, realizing as he did so, they had the hostages! He pulled off their hoods. One was a feisty red-headed woman with an Asian look who was gagged. Kaido pulled the hood off the other. "Himari Fujimoto!" he exclaimed, and bent down to examine her. "How is she?" Mellor yelled from the front. "Breathing, but unconscious." Said the feisty one. Kaido pulled off her gag. Both girls had their arms handcuffed behind them and their legs tied. "Mellor, the radio!" cried the woman. "What?" The radio was crackling in Korean. Kaido crawled back and took position. He could see the lights behind were starting to sort themselves out. "Use the radio! Tune to 26.515 frequency. Code word, Rapid Stallion." "Rapid what?" "Just do it!" "Okay!" Mellor did as bid. "We're half a mile back, but gaining. Looks like they left the third one, but I think there's a fourth SUV medal," Kaido yelled. "What did she say in Russian?" "Rabid Stallion, I repeat, Rabid Stallion," Mellor said into the radio, then yanked it free of its place in the center console and said, "It's a code for reinforcements, give this to her." The heat was on full, but that back window and recent structural impacts certainly brought a breeze into the vehicle. Kaido quickly grabbed the radio, then realized the women couldn't do anything if they were bound, then wondered if the key on his ring would fit North Korean cuffs or only Japanese. He was gratified to find it did fit the cuffs of the red-haired woman. He gave her the radio and the key. She nodded and began repeating the same nonsense phrase as Mellor. Mellor yelled back, "Kaido! You know where tracking beacons are in these things?" "Under the steering column," he yelled back. The snow was getting thicker and Mellor was going very fast, but it couldn't be helped. It was a godsend. The way was plowed, but he could see already there was a half-inch of new snow and it was increasing every minute. He rummaged around under the steering wheel and found a number of likely candidates, but couldn't find out which was which. They would be crazy not to keep tabs on themselves, though, these North Koreans. Mellor was sure the vehicle could be remotely tracked. Finally, he yelled back, "We have to lose these bastards! Get new car! Ideas?" Rabid Stallion, Sonetchka continued to yell into the radio. I see three behind. Looks like they was spaced out following us. Kaido yelled back. As to ideas, I don't... A Russian voice called out in odd poetry over the crackling CB. A rabid stallion definitely won't drink. Where must he be going? Where are we? Sonechka yelled at Melor. He blinked. Southeast of Yakutsk. The road is... What is... He switched to Japanese. Kaido, what's the road? It is 98K001. And he took several carefully placed shots at the tires of their pursuers. He didn't hit them, but he saw sparks from an impact along a bumper. The three began to fishtail like a snake, but resumed speed in a moment. Melor yelled to Sonechka in Russian. It is 98K001. The rabid stallion is southeast on 98K001, and three rabid wolves pursue. Stand by. And the radio went quiet. Sonechka crawled to Himari and freed her of the gag and the handcuffs. She continued to sleep, mercifully, but Sonechka noticed she trembled, perhaps in cold. She found a jacket of one of the vehicle's previous occupants and draped it around her. The snow was picking up, and now there was a full inch on the road. Melor barreled down precisely the center, keeping the vehicle even and easing off the gas, barely sliding around several gentle curves. How far to Maya? Melor yelled back. 4 miles, Kaido called back. Then there's a side road, and it's another couple miles until the woods. Melor growled expletives under his breath. The needle was jangling about between 110 and 120 kilometers an hour. They're gaining, said Kaido. I see lights ahead, Kaido. How far back? Don't hit the brakes. Kaido started firing at the tires behind again. This time they returned fire. Sonechka covered Himari and Kaido ducked down. Melor did the same, sliding so he could barely see over the dashboard. Kaido returned fire and was gratified this time to see the head vehicle begin to list to the right. The other two were quick to swerve around. Now they were coming again. Rabid stallion, I am en route with Wolf Corral, crackled the Russian voice over the CB. They topped a rise to see bright lights ahead, full of high beams. Sonechka yelled into the radio, We're in the front! Block the ones behind! Roger that. And as they passed the semi, it slammed its brakes and swerved, becoming a diagonal line across the whole road. Thank you, Sonechka Machka of the South. Pavel Maksha, unaffiliated. Safe travels, replied the radio. The semi slid to a stop, the engine halfway in the far ditch. In the rearview mirror, Melor could see lights coming around the sides of the semi. They were going to try and drive around on terrain. He looked forward and hit the accelerator. What was that? Some gypsy code? It was a distress call our people are not allowed to ignore, Sonechka said from the back. But now my caravan owes him up to the value of his unit. Redeemable wherever I can confirm it. Kaido scrambled up to the space between the front seats. My shouldn't be but a mile up. Melor, can you steer a car, one parked, without a key? I can try. Pray we find one running idle for the cold. Suddenly, the town opened up, and Melor skidded through the first right he could take off the main road. The streets were certainly plowed here as well, but new snow was cutting into what progress was made. The SUV fishtailed for the umpteenth time. Soon they saw a grocer, and Melor quickly pulled around the back side of the building. Indeed, there was a large truck, burping smoke in the cold, right behind the facility. Melor slammed on the brakes and threw it in park as the vehicle continued to drift over ice. He hopped out and yanked open the middle door in the back, carefully grabbing Himari and putting her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, left arm holding her, right arm with a gun. Kaido and Sonechka came out the other side of the vehicle, and all four converged on the old produce truck idling behind the grocer. A Saka man noticed them running for it and began yelling. Melor didn't hear what he said. He fired automatic rounds at his feet, and the man leapt back inside the open door of the grocer, crashing into boxes of produce with no small amount of expletives. Someone else slammed the door. The truck was unlocked. Melor carefully set unconscious Himari in the middle of the bench seat beside him in a seated position. Sonechka and Kaido squeezed in the other side. He backed up fast and spun the wheel, slamming into the black SUV with intending to disable it from being recouped by their adversaries. He then pulled out onto a dirt alley and smashed the gas till they drifted out onto a main street once more. Kaido had his phone out and he was going through the map quickly. Sestra Maya was only coordinates. It had no precise route. Errol said they only plow main roads in a winter, not the way to those coordinates, Kaido observed. Let's hope this truck has traction. And Melor took the phone from him a moment, then handed it back. He made a left and followed the road until it became dirt, and they passed a frozen body of water by the tire ruts and a spot of clarity through the storm. Ahead was indefinable cloudiness silhouetted in sky-piercing trees. Behind was the same. But there were tire tracks in the unkept road through the snow. Enough to half clear the road. Where they were headed, others had gone before, and very recently. Kaido's eyes were sharp as the cold. Melor clenched his jaw. Sonechka said a prayer. Himari slept. Into the maelstrom they went. Ethan was able to make the trip in 90 minutes by pitching the cat and its carrier unreservedly at shift points, sprinting through, and taking no thought to his surroundings. First was a desert around a pit where once was a crustacean ziggurat bigger than any man-made structure. Next they came out in a no-man's land full of human excreta, chemical smoke from synthetic barbiturates, a roving spirit of evil in every molecule of the space, and gorgeous weather, Los Angeles. The third portal dropped him in a rolling meadow so colorful with flora he couldn't bear to look. Then he came out somewhere in Papua New Guinea, startling the speech out of an old woman hanging animal hides for some purpose. She thought him a devil. The next portal came out around another superstructure like that he, Ricky, and Clever Ed took down 6 years back. But it wasn't a ziggurat. It was a spiraling shell like a hermit crab. It was oriented horizontally rather than vertically, though it did turn up at a slight angle toward the spiraling point of the shell. This example was every bit as large as the conch ziggurat Ethan remembered, and indeed a violet river of chemicals snaked from its front like the peroxide river out of the other. Ethan ran to the shift point. It was very near the structure, pitched the cat, and came out in the center of a server array several miles from Salt Lake City in Utah. Finally, he breathed and noted his watch. He had to blink the fatigue out of his eyes. He could feel it coming to rest on him like a blanket. He heard the cat retching and put the pack to the side. The portal closed and Stumpy hissed at him. He cleaned the animal's mets, then dropped a beef jerky through the zipper from a side pocket, and the cat growlingly accepted. Sorry, bud, Ethan temporized. I don't have time for you to get a good attitude. You're staying in there till I'm safe. Stumpy hissed. Well, you do that, said Ethan. Found an end-user portal sticking out from a central server, then quickly began to plug in his own equipment. He fished in his pack, and his fingers found something cylindrical. He pulled it out. It was one of those little vitamin B shots you could buy at a gas station. Thank you, Jesus, Ethan said, meaning it, glancing skyward, then ripping the plastic from the little bottle and sucking it down. He felt it hit his gut and send warmth all over his skin. There was a shiver. He was still tired, but he could keep his eyes open now. In moments, he had his AR headset on and a little flash drive with a mimic program. He found the monitoring software whoever sat in the server's office array would use to keep an eye on individual units. The servers stretched around him in a warehouse the size of Kyum Susan Palace of the Sun. Each server tower was about 8 feet tall and 5 or 4 wide. The ceilings were low, and it was very cool inside the building. Server towers were stacked one by the other in rows stretching so far it was hard to see the end of the warehouse. There could easily have been 1,000,000 individual servers. Multiple clouds of such size existed. Through the AR headset, he acquired the spoofing program necessary for monitoring software. They then conducted a search query through his flash drive to see how many units there were. The next bit was tricky. He had to turn facility power off and on fast to spoof the monitoring software. He sent the override and waited, counting down to 30 in his head. Then the lights turned off throughout the facility for about 10 seconds. Abruptly, they came back on, and he sent the spoofed software interface. It would look exactly like the old menu and indicate every single server was in fine working order. It showed persons monitoring the array, a loop of data from the previous 48 hours, but camouflaged under the current date. He now had the ability to exploit the array without being noticed. First, he set up a holographic routing option for data, then aligned all servers to his purpose, utilizing them simultaneously like individual ones and zeros on a single computer. Only his end-user portal, via AR headset, now became their controller. Using the totality of this array, he was able to very quickly brute force hack a cluster of satellites managed by the Russian Federation, find the nearest one with eyes on Yakutsk, adjust the camera to Maya, then enter coordinates for Sestra Maya, getting it all done with a few silent hand gestures in the air. He couldn't get eyes on anything. There was a storm system. "Well, isn't that perfect?" Ethan observed sarcastically. As he stabilized his position, there was suddenly static, and Ethan recognized the efforts of that North Korean QAI. But now was something even more interesting. He could also detect the presence of the VKD QAI on the same satellite cluster. The data of both QAIs was represented in language corresponding to the host country. Both of them were crowding him out. He didn't focus on this for the moment. What he focused on was figuring out how he could leech on to the protocols of the QAIs. If he could do that, he could trace them to their source. It was a pity he couldn't image their hard data. Hold on a second. Both were tied to some sort of external string that was neither localized nor stratified across cloud networks. The hell is that? Ethan wondered. He pulled back the AR headset and looked around the array. There would be no way to crack this mystery if he couldn't explore the information at his leisure. But he'd have to store it. If he assumed X amount of petabytes per array, it was big enough, all right. Maybe. Figuring out where that processing string came from would be vital. Presently, he had no way of finding its source, which was unprecedented for Ethan, and what's more, that source provided a primary computational facility for both AIs. Also, both strings went somewhere separate and unique from each other. Something quite strange was going on, and remembering his time fleeing the demons in the other world, Ethan had a hunch what that might mean. He resumed the headset and sent packets designed to replicate data protection protocols to either other world. To either QAI. He wanted to shroud those software protocols as localized to the satellite array to hide his footsteps. So he ended up looking at the satellite configuration and just about fainted. "It's military," he breathed. The damn satellite had a weaponized emerald LiDAR array. LiDAR stood for light detection and ranging. In a nutshell, such arrays commonly fired a laser grouping in bursts around 10,000 flashes per second. They were used for mapping terrain, not attacks. However, there was a subroutine in this particular satellite that would focus the beams and fire them in a continuous burst until solar batteries were depleted. "It could take out a small town," Ethan muttered, feeling his heart beat. Now he was on a rabbit trail. How tight could he focus the beam? It could narrow to about a 50-foot wide circle of green light. It would spit a beam nearly 2,000 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale for a full 5 seconds. Then the satellite's batteries would be exhausted and it would require about 48 hours to recharge. Almost unconsciously, Ethan slaved it and saved connectivity data to backdoor himself in later. He also started a protocol to spoof backup so automatic data preservation would funnel to the array he broke into. It would be stored holographically and hidden from those monitoring the system until space limits were overcome and things started to malfunction. Lastly, Ian sent himself a cloud key so he could access his work anywhere the cloud was, which was almost worldwide. All these things took him about 20 minutes. He could have done it 5 minutes quicker if his brain wasn't fogged from shifting. As yet, none noticed him at the end-user portal wearing his AR headset and making gestures like a wild man, then occasionally typing things into the portal. There were probably only 3 people in the whole building, and they wouldn't be among the servers often. Now he needed to make contact. He didn't have eyes on anybody because of the storm, and the QAIs were blocking him out. He used the Utah server array to brute force a backdoor previously blocked off, and at length managed to slink into Errol's server array. Quickly he started cycling through surveillance feed in the little cottage. There were 20 mercenaries in diverse Russian military getup, carefully moving through the place, looking at every little detail. He checked the basement. It was empty. They were yet to find the door behind the washer and dryer. Ethan cut to the common room's feed. A massive bald man wearing body armor crouched down in front of Errol and Ricky, who were shackled on the floor.